So this history of art, I think, has played around this circle, but every now and again it goes into the centre and we see the visionary at work, or the artist that taps into a, let's say, super consciousness. They go beyond the five senses, and every now and again you see that where there's been an elevation in terms of moving to one level of awareness into another perception of what's going on in the world. And I'll give you an example. Every now and again through history you have people that are seen as they would be seen as a genius, or an eccentric, or even deemed as being mad or crazy. And I'm talking about art now, not necessarily other areas. And people like William Blake, Van Gogh, all these people looked to be eccentric at one point in this so-called circular history, but in actual fact they were always strongly connected to the centre of the circle, which was their imagination, their super consciousness. They had a shamanic ability to them, but the modern society at the time portrayed them as probably being slightly mad because they didn't fit within the structure of that time, to the point where they were marginalised. And how many artists even today still feel like they're marginalised by a system that is focused purely on the five senses, and even more so focused on death rather than life. I think it's changed, Johnny. You know, what you have is a kind of one of the main themes, I suppose, has been constantly connecting with archetypes. And the archetypes are, you know, when you think about the study of Jung and other people, but mainly Jung, we have these classic archetypes that are part of that oral, traditional, symbolic language. And I've tried to use that and then go above it and beyond it in many ways. But, you know, themes like people used to make fun, say, you know, oh, you're doing another Christmas card painting, for example. Are you going to include any aliens in it? So, you know, the idea of painting things necessarily that aren't seen. So painting things that we don't see. Because really, if you think about it, art, I mean, I love the fact that art people paint whatever they want to paint, but for me, art's about painting what we don't see. Otherwise, there would be no point. If I wanted to copy something, imitate reality, then that's fine. There's a technique involved in that. It's great, and there's some skill, real skill in trying to do that. But it doesn't set my soul on fire. It doesn't make me connect with that place in the centre, that infinite source of super consciousness that exists within us, and all about us. So for me, art has to be tapping into things that are unseen, realms of reality that we don't necessarily see with the naked eye. I think it's not just art that can empower you. It's obviously there's other areas as well. But yeah, if you're making art, what you're naturally doing is moving out of time. You're moving out of this timelessness, this connection to the grid, as I call it, or the world that locks us into logic and this reality. If you're not engaged in art, or you're not engaged in creativity, then you're in some way you're missing out. If creativity is poetry, if it's singing, dancing, music, writing, doesn't matter what it is, it can be anything. But ultimately, you're going into a timeless zone, a dreamlike space, like daydreaming, which allows you to be connected to these other levels of yourself, these other levels of reality. Zoning out and switching off is so crucial. That's why the education system is detrimental in many ways to a lot of people, because it doesn't allow kids that time to zone out. I mean, when I was zoning out as a kid, it was probably easier back in the day. There was less distraction. I mean, today we're absolutely saturated with technology. It's one of the, it's a blessing, but it's also really bad, in as much that it's taken us away from that connection. I mean, the amount of people that spend time on electronic devices, you know, reading and looking at pads. I mean, I see people walking around all the time while they're walking and texting. You're looking at an almost a mutation taking place within our lifetime, a mutation of the next generation, which are locked into technology so deeply because it's been too readily available. The technology is not allowing us to have that zoning out period. It's making people not want to read books. I read an article somewhere by Dr. Greenwood at the Oxford University professor talking about technology taking the next generation away from the basic activities of reading, as an example, because the waves in the brain are changing. It's rewiring the brain in simple terms, and it's making people not want to engage in certain things that we would naturally have done. We would have done anyway, if the technology wasn't there. So if the technology wasn't there, then we would be reading and doing other things. And you look at kids today. I mean, some kids today are even given pads and androids and things from an early age. It's not good. In my view, it's not good, because it's actually stopping this natural connection to something which is above and beyond the five sense reality, which is so entrenched in technology now. We have to break that connection in some ways, and one of the ways to break the connection is through creativity, through the creative imagination. That's why if you leave a child to just get on with drawing and making and creating without any prejudice or limitation or lack of worry or fear of what somebody else might think of what they're doing, which children do naturally, you are massaging that kind of connection to the imagination. Play is another example. Art is play. If you're playing with paints, you're playing and you're exploring, it's no different to a child playing with a toy. The only difference is maybe you might have an agenda. Sometimes play has an agenda, but sometimes it's just play. It just goes and meanders like a river somewhere, and to a point where you come round from the play and you say, oh, where was I for the past 2 or 3 hours? And that's what painting does. You know, you could start painting, as I started with this painting that day, that morning, back in 1994, and by the end of the day there was this face staring back at me, and the first thing that came into my head was a watcher. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. I've looked into it since, and I know what that relates to. And you know, you're talking about, again, connections to what we would perceive to be deities and entities and all these other levels of reality. Some people are calling them ETs today. I don't necessarily think it's give something a name and you can limit it. I think it's more to do with the fact that there are other levels of reality that personify themselves through our creativity and our imagination, that we then pinpoint and focus on to give them life in this world. These things exist, but they don't exist in this matrix, this grid that we're in. We have to go somewhere else to make that connection with them. This is one of the oldest paintings. There's quite a few, but this is a really old painting for me. I painted this in London. There was a period for me when I worked and lived in London in the early 90s, and it's a great example of what I'm talking about, because this painting one day, and anybody who paints will know this, or anybody who makes art will understand what I'm talking about. This painting came from nowhere. I got up one morning in a studio the same size as this. I've always worked in a very small confided space, as I say, and I cracked open a canvas, or I stretched a canvas in this case. This is one that I made, and I just decided I was going to just paint what came through that day, and behold came the Watcher. It's a very old painting. It's 93, 92, 93, I think. 94, sorry, 94. And there's some significance behind it, because I'd always felt a connection to certain, let's say, mythological creatures and entities and things in stories that I'd read about over the years. But I didn't know what this was, and I painted it, and somebody said to me at the time, "What is that? It looks like a monkey, looks like a tree, looks like an owl." And in actual fact, when you get to that level of painting and interacting with things that are unseen, a painting can take on many different forms. It doesn't have to be a painting like this, of course. It could be a landscape, it could be anything, it could be a dreamscape, it could be whatever it is, it could be abstract. This isn't abstract, of course, it's a sort of literal, surreal image. I painted it, of course, and I took about a day to do, and it's been with me ever since. But what's weird, I put together a book about 12 years ago. And that book, which is no longer in print, I'd come across these kind of Syrian images on artifacts, as sculptures they were, outside one of the temples, and it had these creatures on them, you know, like long-haired looking kind of bearded kind of alien-like creatures. And I'd not seen that when I painted that. That just came through out of nowhere. It was many, many months later when I saw the book with the drawings in. I thought, blimey, that looks like them. You know, that looks like that kind of creature. Now, I'm not saying that they exist. What I'm saying is that in the realm of creative imagination, in the realm of the human realm of the imagination, everything exists. It doesn't matter whether people choose to believe it or not. The fact that we have imagination means that we can bring into reality anything that exists within that sea of consciousness. So we can manifest and change reality through the art of creative imagination. That's why art is a powerful tool for that. That's why art is constantly being undermined by the powers that be. Unless you're involved in the in club, unless you're involved as an elite artist in some way, you know, you're paid millions for whatever it is, whether it's a skull encrusted in diamonds or whatever it is, without naming names. These people are brought to the forefront and celebrated because of their focus on things that are keeping the general population focused on subjects that relate to decay and death and distraction, mediocrity, all those things. I think artists and people that want to go down that route have a responsibility to create work that comes from the power source within. Now, something like this came from within, came from without. Within, it's the same thing. A bit above is below, and you know, and everywhere is nowhere. So that's been my driving connection. To go back to your question, driving connection through everything that I've done is to make an effort to set aside time, as such, if you want to call it that, to make imagery that speaks of a higher purpose and a higher connection to energy, to truth, to vibrations that are more than this world. I mean, I've had some dreams that I wouldn't want to paint, you know, but yeah, they do. Yeah. I mean, I've had artists come to me and tell me stories about what they've seen. There was a friend of mine told me a really lovely story once about a dream that she'd had, which was of a people standing on a hilltop, and the clouds in this dream were turning into what looked like giant personified faces, and they were being drawn towards the crowd that were all in white. And I found it quite interesting because she said one cloud, a big cloud, wouldn't turn around and face them, wouldn't turn its head to face the crowd. And I just found that fascinating, how we can, I mean, you know, how a dream can be so inspiring, to turn into a painting, but there's more often than not, there's a deeper message behind it. I've had lots of dreams where I've been given insight into reality, the nature of the nature of reality, the plight, the future. The future can be the past as well, so it's not necessarily the future. You could be going back in time because we're looking at a circular motion. You've got little studies like this where you're sitting and you're working things out. So something comes with a certain amount of rapidity, but then you get in reference for it and you're looking at it, and then something of that nature can become something like this. Okay. As it works itself into another format, another version of what it is you're trying to achieve. And then there's a design element in me. There's a designer, an analytical person that wants to have a measure of something as I work through it. I have a series of stages. I know what is a rough idea, what I'm trying to change into something else, how I'm trying to develop it, obviously, and then you've got other people that might have some say in the process, depending on what project it is you're working on. Well, this painting is from the same period as The Watcher. it was painted in London, in the London studio at that time, and I had my head in a lot of books through the mid-90s into the late 90s, books that were, let's say, books that are channeled, the idea of channeling information. And I found some of the books fascinating, purely because they were talking about concepts that I was seeing in dreams, and picking up on similar kind of bits of information. And this particular painting at that time was based on something that was to do with the Pleiadian consciousness, the idea of Pleiadians and Pleiadian agenda. There was a book called The Pleiadian Agenda. I remember it well, called, I think it was Barbara Hand-Clough, I think. And there's a couple of other ones. There's a Barbara Marciniak's book as well, Bringers of the Dawn. So it was that period, and I was very much interested in the channeled information. I was turning that into picture form. So this is one of the paintings. But like a lot of paintings, and I can't show you the others because I don't have them, they're not here, but very similar. There were about 3 or 4 of the same period, where the earth, the eye, the entity, the sun, the pyramids, the constellations were all coming into play in these paintings. One painting, which is very similar to this, I called it, back in 1993, Here Comes the Moon. I didn't know why I called it that, it just came to me. And I had this painting of what was essentially a kind of creature, a devil of some kind, blowing the moon towards the earth. And the moon here is attached to the earth in this way. But this painting, where it shows the moon was being blown, that actually got into the Best of British Illustration back in '93. It won an award as such. I don't even think the judges knew what they were selecting, because it was all about the fall of. I even used the word "fall of Atlantis" in the description. What's he talking about? Here comes the moon, the fall of Atlantis. So it was. I was, even in the mainstream illustration world, I was still involved in at that time. I was trying to break into these other subjects that you would never see in a million years in the commercial world. So this painting is, I called this, and it's in the same set of the others, I called it the 4th dimensional watchers. So it's the predator consciousness, the 4th dimensional watchers. I didn't know what that meant at the time, it just sounded right. And in recent years, I've discovered lots of other things to do with the eye symbolism, and the idea that this is the all-seeing eye. But actually what's interesting here is the constellation of Orion. And everybody who's read their stuff know that. The 3 main belt stars linked to the pyramids. The eye was more about the idea of some kind of God looking into what we would perceive as this world, like we look at goldfish in a goldfish bowl. So imagine for a second that we're all fish inside a bowl on one level of reality, going about our business, and then along comes something that is much bigger in terms of physicality, and he's staring into the goldfish bowl and looking into this world, hence the kind of lucidity of what this was about. Now, the goldfish have no understanding of what that is that's staring at them. They to try and understand the perception of a fish. How can a fish understand the life of a bird, and all these kind of philosophical thoughts that we can have. But the human entity that's staring into the goldfish is carrying with it a whole kind of different view of the world, of what's going on, and how much more power that they could have over the so-called goldfish inside their very limited bowl-like reality. So that's what this was about. This was an entity peering in to what we would perceive as a reality that is very much connected to Earth, Moon and Sun consciousness. The Orion Belt plays a big part in the story, because from my own sort of visionary feelings into things in meditation, the constellation of Orion is probably connected to other driving forces that are trying to change and meddle with our world in that way. So there's a big connection to Orion. This is also, when I think back now, it's also a symbol of the demiurge in the Gnostic teachings, it's also Saturn. So you've got the idea of Saturn, Satanism and all this kind of thing, symbolic as the eye staring in and the control it has over this reality. Now, whether the Earth's flat, whether the Earth's a sphere, whether it's a coffee table, I've looked at all this stuff over, recent months, and I don't think it matters. I mean, knowing the Earth's flat, or everything is flat on one level, but knowing that it's flat or whatever it is, it's kind of irrelevant for me, because it's what we have is an illusionary sphere, a reality that something else is having an effect on. The passing bird god here, at the time when I painted it, related to the Pleiadians. So the Pleiadian consciousness, which was very, very, in my view, was quite malevolent. It wasn't something that was necessarily a good thing. I'm not saying that there isn't good Pleiadian consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, but in my view, this was passing by and it was indifferent. So you have this idea of an overall face, the face of our world, the face of or the vision of our reality, our plight, and the idea that the three-dimensional reality is very different to a fourth-dimensional reality, which is very different to a fifth-dimensional, sixth-dimensional, and so on and so on. As you get out of that limitation, that goldfish bowl, then you not only have the potential to travel into other areas and see other things, the illusion becomes expansive based on your ability to perceive outside of that very limited scope. So that's what the painting was about in some ways. There's other things as well, but that's the use of red and blue is quite important, because in all of the ancient myths there was a realm of deities that related to the red. They called them the red and the blue deities. And in South American cultures, they had names for them. They were connected to Quetzalcoatl and these other deities. And the red and the blue was something, if you look closely, without getting really into it in this interview, but if you look closely, you'll find the red and the blue symbolism within much of what we would call everyday life, from flags, insignias, superheroes, Superman, Spider-Man. Come to spiders in a second. The red pill and the blue pill in the Matrix movie. The red and the blue is quite an interesting colour combination, because the blue generally relates to, in terms of Aboriginal culture, the blue relates to what they called the stars, space. And the red related to the genetics, the blood of the earth, the physicality. And so you had genetics in terms of stars and genetics in terms of people. And when you look at the whole idea of holographic reality and the fact that brain cells can look like universes, this connection between red and blue were seen as opposing forces, or the duality of the illusion interplaying to create the structure for religions and beliefs and all those kind of things. So what I'm trying to say is that there had to be some kind of understanding of duality born within the mind of humanity to give them this notion to have religions and deities and all these other things within their very beliefs and life structures. It was given to them by other forces outside of their reality, like the god or the person that comes to the goldfish bowl and put some food in the goldfish bowl for the fish to consume. Our beliefs were given to us. They were placed in the goldfish bowl so that we would consume them.
Wow.
And the blue and the red is symbolic of that underpinning blueprint that was the foundation for the beliefs and the structures. The little yellow focus there on the earth, that's meant to be Atlantis going under. So that's the last of the crystals that were sank, in my view, sank in Atlantis. So the earth mass, the nature of the hologram was shifting and changing here at the time when these forces were interplaying. It's oil, by the way, this. I don't normally paint in oil these days. I've just started painting in oil again. It's a real challenge when you've not used oil paint for such a long time to go back into that way of thinking. It's quite hard. I tend to use acrylic on canvas, which I like because of the rapidity of it drying and being able to work with lines and detail. Become obsessed with lines and detail in certain images. Whereas at this period, back in the 90s, I was more interested in the sort of dreamlike quality of the paint, and I was inspired by artists like Cecil Collins, who was the head of St Martin's up until he died in 1989. That was probably the most modern of the modernists up to the sensational period. Anything after that, I'd lost interest. But when I mean lost interest, I didn't really look at. And then obviously interested in all the post-impressionist painters and how they handled paint. I was fascinated by the way in which paint was pretty raw. Even today, it's not, we don't paint like that anymore. People have found other methods and media in terms of expressing themselves. I mean, like film, for example, is the modern day media now of the shamanic artist. That's why we have movies and blockbusters and things that are really, really designed to instill subconsciously a set of beliefs on the populations. Film is a medium for that, it's a tool for it. I seldom get inspiration from modern art, as we would call it. And when I say modern art, I mean anything from the sensational period up to now. So from the 80s through to today, like the past 20 years, nothing for me at all. I mean, that might seem extreme to anybody listening to this, but I've just taken no inspiration from that period. I can appreciate other people's work. I can appreciate what they've done and what they've made. I mean, for example, I can appreciate the skill and the attention to detail of the paintings of Alex Gray. Okay? Absolutely, I can appreciate that, and they're very skillful paintings. There are much better painters than myself out there in the world that are making all sorts of fantastic art. But in terms of subject matter, give and take one or two others, I feel like I'm on my own with what I'm trying to do. I think it is being policed, but it's not policed in the way that we think it's being policed. It's not policed by policemen. It's policed by unseen forces, levels of reality. I mean, for anybody who's listening to this for the first time, I think you're just another crazy artist. You have situations with art where if you're tapping into a subject matter, and I've had this experience where I've gone into a state to be able to get information. Let's call it meditation, for whatever word you want to use, where you go into this other zone to get some kind of information. And sometimes you find that there are attempts to block you based on what you're trying to get, of course, but based on your immediate feeling of euphoria, where you're going into another level of reality. You feel like you're freeing yourself of something. I had an incident actually in this building where I'd woken up from a sleep with what felt like an entity trying to attach itself to me, and without going into great detail, moving the entity away from me. But before that period happened, before I actually woke up and everything was fine, I had this real sense of freedom, like I was about to break through a window into another reality. And it wasn't a tunnel, there wasn't a light in the tunnel, it was actually it was almost like sliding open a window, like a window on your house, and realizing that you could just step out of it into a vast landscape. Wow. And even if you were high up, it wouldn't matter, you just step out of it and you were into something else. There was no limitation. The window was the limitation. Your perception, the small area that you were seeing through, was your limitation. Soon as that window's gone, then everything comes into view. Everything you can see comes into view. And just at that point, I remember it in the dream, just at that point where you're about to break into this sense of freedom, this spiritual freedom, for a better word. Just at that point, the best way I can describe it was like a quiet before the storm. You know that feeling just before the storm is about to
Yeah.
go for it. At that point, like a nanosecond, something flew in and spiraled in and tried to attach itself to my heart at that point. And it was like a black kind of swirling kind of energy. But it tried to attach itself to stop me from going out of this window. Because as you break out of that, you're out into something else. And art and all these other things that I'm talking about, they're and all these things that we all do, you know, all our creative use of our energy can take us into that place where we can step out of that very narrow box. The other side to the story was that I woke up that morning. I'd felt something trying to attach to me, and I woke up, pulled it off and threw it. I woke up that morning and there was a big bloody spider at the bottom of on the floor on the other side of the bed. Huge spider, dead, like that. I mean, some people would say, oh Neil, you had a spider on you and dead. I probably did. But the point is that the physical world, the five sense world, would have been a spider crawling on you while you sleep. They do that all the time. That was then translated in a dreamscape as me throwing something off me, which was probably the spider. And having that image of the thing swirling in the window and not being able to break out doesn't mean that dream wasn't real as can be. Because as you think about what the Aborigines and other native cultures said over the years, is that what is the dream and what is real? We spend a lot of time asleep. Where are we? What are we doing? So, you know, the reality for me is whatever you want it to be. You know, you can have a life in this reality, and you can have a life in a dreamscape. They're both as valid as each other in terms of art and creativity and the realms of the imagination. And that's what makes an artist stand out in terms of their energy. Not necessarily their work, but their energy, because of their connection to this lack of, this not being limited by the perception of what is real and what isn't real. Yeah, so I mean, this is an older one, but it's just as relevant in terms of taking photographs. These are all my own photographs. There's me when I was in my 20s. I was in Scotland. I had a very interesting experience at that place where that tree was. It was in a place called Meagle, near Blairgowrie, not far from Glams. And there was a few of us friends at the time, and we went up on top of this hill, which was like Glastonbury Tor. And we were all in a circle holding hands, and we all had this very, very strong, energetic, magnetic vibration to the earth. It was like receiving an electric shock. And that was back in 95. And then, actually there's an image here of a rough idea of something that was to do with the chaos in our world, which is created through war and other fighting. And then you have the idea of these higher super consciousness energy coming, the truth vibration coming in through that portal I was talking about and removing the archontic demonic energy. So that's where the sketch started, and that's what it ended up as. So anyway, this painting is more recent, of course, and this was the cover of David Icke's book, Remember Who You Are. And it's, looking at this one, Johnny, it's completely different now in the way in which I work. There's some similarity in style and attention to certain aspects of what I've been doing. Kind of gone up in scale, and I like working at this size sometimes, but there's a lot more to this painting than I've ever had the opportunity to explain, so thanks for letting me do that. And I just wanted to show you, for people that are interested, but I start out with very, very small ideas, coffee shops, cake, and an idea in a sketchbook is usually where I go with things. So you can even see there, the general idea of what this became. And then I tend to then leave that, and I tend to come back and then work on something that's a little bit more in keeping with what I'm trying to achieve. So reference material and all the rest of it, and that takes on a new form completely. So the structure has always been the same way I work, but the results can be a little bit different. So this painting's full of symbolism for me. It's for anybody who's interested, this painting is purely my idea. It came from seeing something that I saw very, very clearly as a vision, and David liked it and wanted to use it for the cover at that time. This is back in 2011. Now, I'd been reading a couple of books as well at the same time, but the vision was quite clear. It was quite simple and straightforward. And what you have is, symbolically, you have the head of humanity. You have humanity as a whole. That's the idea. You have this focus also on the left and right side of the brain, which anybody who's looked at their neurological science know that two different hemispheres are very different. But they need each other in some ways. They're obviously connected with the corpus callosum and the bridge between them, but they're very different. And what I saw in my vision was a world in the left-hand side here, portrayed with all of this green energy, as the matrix, as the illusionary three-dimensional perception of reality. And inside it you've got all these kind of chaotic images, political things, war, money, certain people that you recognise. But the key thing is that it's projecting out of a labyrinth. It's projecting from this perpetuating kind of lost cause. The labyrinth is a place where one would lose themselves, symbolically. You get bamboozled in the labyrinth. Everything in there is about trying to find your way home. And in many ways also you have this idea of a false reality, almost like some kind of virus on a computer that is then creating a false projection of the real world that we should be living in. So it's projecting out of this labyrinth. What's underpinning this and holding this projection in place, this illusion, here is the moon. And the moon, represented by the clock and time and other entities, the reptilian eye is part of that. But so you have the time as a construct projecting out of the labyrinth. Overseeing that, right above the crown chakra and the chakra system that we have within the subtle bodies of human beings, the crown chakra is Saturn. Saturn is crowning the crown chakra, because what is happening here is that the satanic or Saturn-like vibration as a frequency is holding the crown energy in place. It's disconnecting us from everything that we could be connected to, which ties into the next point. On the right-hand side of the brain, we don't have a labyrinth. We have a labyrinth, but we have a very different labyrinth. We have one that is more natural, one that looks like the womb, one that can be seen in certain ancient cultures. This natural labyrinth, not a construct, a man-made construct, but a natural one. It's still a lost cause without the energy that's needed, but it's much more fluid and dreamlike. And what we have coming in, connected to the centre here, which I'll explain in a minute, is the solar consciousness, or the sun. And I mentioned earlier on, we have portals between this reality and another reality where I saw giant lions walking through a wormhole. And here we have them coming through the wormhole, through the power of the sun, to enter the centre. The central part of the labyrinth and the maze on the right, the labyrinth on the left, is what we understand in our world as the pineal gland, which is our receptor and perceiver of how we create reality, how we perceive reality, how light codes are infused to create reality as we see it. The serpent here is weaving up the spine, as in the spinal column of humanity, taking note of the fact that there are 33 vertebrae, and sitting atop the 33rd vertebrae is the eye, the pineal gland. So you have 33 degrees of Freemasonry with the all-seeing eye above it. The potential here and here is to lock down humanity and keep them in this structure. And as the serpent, the Kundalini, is working its way up to the top, something is happening. The remembering process, there's a helping hand coming. And the helping hand here is symbolic of our higher superconsciousness. Placing the light stone, the crystal stone, back in the center where the pineal gland is situated. In other words, true sight is being given back to those that are blind. For those that are only in this world and not integrated into this reality. And what we have here is a connection also to all of the ancient myths in terms of coma. And the Greeks talked about coma, the goddess, the energy, and the fact that humanity would be woken out of their coma, their trance-like sleep, by the placing of the stone in the tree of life. Here's the tree in the Garden of Eden with the serpent coming up it. The stone is placed back in the tree, and at that point the projection ceases to exist. This false virus-like projection is turned off, like a projector is turned off in a cinema, and the screen goes dead. What are we left with? We're left with what we've always had and what we always will have, which is our true self, our true sight of what the world is really like, and not dwelling in this false illusionary structure. The power of Saturn over the crown chakra will diminish. The hold of the moon over the projection, time will cease to exist as we know it. We become daydreamers in our own time, in our own space. So when I painted this, I had lots of things in mind. The comet also is something I still hold to, even to this day. I still feel that we will see a comet, we'll see a fire in the sky at some point, which will be symbolic of this getting nearer to this, when this ceases to exist. There's hope in this painting. There's hope of a better future, or a different way of seeing the world. And that's what I tried to convey in the painting. It's also based on the idea, and this is crucial for me at this time, when I painted it, it was the idea of the information inside David's book. Because I did another painting of him, a portrait of him, as what I called the teacher. And I read a couple of books over the years, and the idea that the teacher's words and the information that was imparted globally would have the same effect or help initiate the initiate by placing the stone in the center. So the teacher's information and knowledge would place the stone back in its rightful position in the tree of life. In other words, the power of the creative imagination and sight of humanity would once again be to its true potential. This piece is something I'd started in the summer, and you've got me right at the end of it really, because I'm now adding the final touches in terms of energy and light, and I tend to use a lot of white in terms of highlighting. I've done for years actually. That's something I've always done. It's something I try and build into the end in terms of detail, and there's still things to do on it, but this painting is connected to another project I've been working on. But if you were to imagine the last thing I've just been talking about, where you've got the placing of the stone, this painting is that figure turning round to face you, but actually the figure's not facing you. The figure is half man, half woman, androgynous in the end, and one side and the other side are united, and they are basically starting to see a brand new world, a new reality. So they're projecting a golden earth here at the heart chakra, and the energy that's coming in to the pineal gland that has been activated since the stone was put back in the tree. So what I tend to use is I use stay wet palettes, with acrylic, and I'm just in the final touches, like I say, I've just really put in detail into the final stages. You'll have to come back and film me the painting at the beginning, So you got the beginning and the end, because this is the end of this one, more or less. Just right at the end, anyway. And I have my friend with me here. I have the Archon and the Wookiee, Chewbacca. He's more of a friend than him, but I just have him here to remind me that they have a big influence over what we see and don't see in that way. Photographs of trips and places most of these are my own photographs, actually. It's funny, this photograph here I took on a plane flying over the States many years ago, and it's actually a place in New Mexico called Shiprock, and I didn't know what I was taking a photograph of, and then several years later I went back and I got the privilege of actually standing right next to it. It's a volcanic plume. And there's a story behind that to do with the Native American Indian stuff, you know, so but I won't bore you with that right now while I finish what I'm doing. Take a lot of photographs as well. Oh, talking about being around standing stones and seeing faces within things. When I was in Peru in 2012, which was a privilege to go with the people that I went with, I really couldn't help but notice that the actual land for me was animated. It had lots of what I would say are faces in clouds, faces in rocks, faces in trees. And what we're doing when we see that is we're seeing the next level of what I would say is the grid, the matrix. We're moving out of this reality into that infinite potential where entities and other creatures have the ability to shape and move it, shapeshift and move into different forms. So we're looking at the fact that one rock could look like a hooded figure pulling the shroud around them. Some faces in rocks can be seen quite clearly. Avebury, not far from here, is absolutely amazing when you think about it. The amount of faces in the rocks, it leaves you with the question: is, you know, what are these? What were they? What vibration or what energetic state was there in the first place to create that residue where the face appears in the substance of the rock? And then bringing us back down to earth. I just love walking around France, photographing interesting people and all the other things. Actually, one drawing in here, so I'm flipping through it, is that you get into looking at creatures on Gothic art and all the rest of it, and I just started getting silly with this, but I started trying to imagine what Van Gogh would look like on another reality. So this cat-like, weird-looking creature with a palette and his brushes. Like I say, testing the imagination and playing around with things is also something that I like to do. Pencil as well as inks. I use a lot of inks. And this one here, featured in a book years ago. I think it was one of David's books, but it's the idea of the reflection facing the true person, and the person, the true form is trying to change the reflection. Things will come in the mirror. And I like the soft use of colours, trying to make it look like the kind of murals you find in Gothic art, that kind of effect. Ideas again for various paintings that came to mind. Oh, there you go. Yeah, sketches of things that that would be entities. Other visions of reality. Creatures, character design. I love teaching character design. I love the idea of using what would be in effect nature and other things to be able to create a so-called entity. Actually, I was involved in a book years ago called The Alien Chronicles, and some of those were slides from that. And then we get into the end of that one. That's a very old sketchbook. There's other sketchbooks I could show you. Sketches I go out in the woods and sketch. Oh, this is an interesting one. Is that Harry Potter? Back in I think it was 1999-2000. I read the book before the films came out, and I was reading the book on holiday, and I tried to kind of imagine, based on the text, which is what I trained originally as, was a book illustrator, I tried to imagine what Harry Potter looked like based on the text, is what we do as book illustrators. And these were the sketches I made that summer in 1999. This is way before the movie came out. So you have Potter there, you have Draco Malfoy here, you know, and Dumbledore and Snape. Funnily enough, I thought I did quite a good rendition of Professor Snape before the movie came out. And these are pure sketches. There's nothing finished here at all. They're just sketching. It's just generating ideas over a cup of tea and reading the book. Hagrid, who doesn't look like me. Thank you very much. This one is the devil card in my version of the tarot. And these are sketches, they're ideas. And as you can see, I've got lots of reference over on this side that I'm using. But the key point about the devil card is that actually the number is 15. The actual card is 15. And the devil card, 1 and 5 equals 6, of course. But I've chosen the European Union as a symbol of the devil card. And how whatever is actually working through this way is creating divide and rule. And we have classic example of all this going on, especially now, especially this year, where seems to have been a lot of movement in Europe, migration, and then we've had all the horrendous things that have happened in Paris since the beginning of this year, 2015. 15 is the devil card. And what's interesting is that the fact that we're moving through a journey, I think, through something energetically. Yeah, it's crucial, really, I think. But symbolically, I portrayed the European Union, in my view, on one level, symbolically, as being a lie to the people. I think artists have a responsibility to break down the illusion, the lies, and the objects of perception that keep us focused in that illusion. So do other people. I mean, everybody. We all do. We have a responsibility. But I'm talking about art in as much that artists that are able to connect and do that should be celebrating the fact that they can show how ludicrous the world can be. That's why art is so powerful, because that's why artists have been targeted way, throughout the eras and decades and centuries. Artists have been persecuted and marginalized, some artists, for having the audacity to actually show the real reality behind what's going on. The emperor's not wearing any clothes. An artist has shown that. Or a scientist artist. I mean, there's plenty of examples of people throughout history that had combinations of different levels of scientific ability, artistic ability. Leonardo da Vinci is a good example. Some people would say he was a master. He was a member of the whatever order of the day, and he may well have been. But putting that aside, the Leonardo da Vinci that I recognise is somebody that was totally and utterly connecting with genius. And that's, for me, that's really important, that we focus on that, not necessarily focus on the other stuff that can distract us. I'll give you another example. Cecil Collins made a speech back in the, I think it was in the 70s, late 70s. No, actually, it was earlier than that. I think it was late 60s, early 70s. He made a speech at in London. This is became the head of fine art at St Martin's, and more or less the talk was about the artist in the New Age, before there was a so-called a New Age as we understand it today. And when he used the word New Age, he wasn't talking about the crystal dangling kind of, I'm a spiritual person New Age. He was talking about the new era. And one of the key things that he said, which struck a chord with me, was he was talking about how when he interviewed art students, how much they said they weren't influenced by anything, and they were truly their own artist with my own unique work in interviews for university and all the rest of it. And he said in his talk, once you point it out to an artist, that actually you were already massively influenced by the world around you, what you consume: TV, music, film, soap opera, drama, family, school, priests, religion. Once you realise that you're already consuming that, you take another look at your work, and it's not very unique on the surface. And he was saying that the real power for him, in terms of the new world, the new age as such, was to get artists to a point where they realized that they had a responsibility to change the perceptions of how we interact with all of those things I've just described. So a real artist of the new age would be somebody that would influence you to turn off your television, to maybe contemplate other levels of reality. It's not that something is I understand what that means when you say something's coming back. I don't think it's ever left us, in as much that once you find that unique individual connection to your power, your infinite power, your infinite awareness, the connection is reinstated. It was always there. I've painted a lot of lions in the last 5 years. Some of them, one was very well known on the cover of David Icke's book. But the lion is something quite important as far as a symbol. Hence the idea of lions awakening and the higher consciousness, and and all these things that have cropped up in recent years in books like the White Lions of Timbunaki, and Zambian white lions, and lions painted to do with lion consciousness and a higher consciousness of Egypt, and you've got the Sphinx, and you've got all these other things that relate to lions. I've tried to incorporate that in a modern illustrative way within my work, like the one here behind me, and that for me is the reconnection that you have just hinted at. That's the recognition that we are not what we think we are, and we are existing above and beyond this very, very kind of illusionary, three-dimensional perception of reality and what we think we are. The lions are symbolic of something much greater. I've had dreams of lions, lion entities, as bright as that painting in yellow, and they were so big, the entities. There was one particular dream of several lions, large lions. In fact, I put them in this new book, Moonslayer. They were asleep in what would look like a wormhole, and they were being woken by another lion, of some kind of smaller lion. They were being woken. They were waking. There was an energy waking. On another level of reality, this can be perceived, in my view, with my art, as these giant lions awakening from in another parallel reality, with all that separates us and them is a wormhole. However, in our Earth-like reality, flat or otherwise, we have people awakening. So, is that married and mirrored with the lions awakening in a parallel reality? Are lions awakening in a parallel reality because humans are awakening? And as the pace gets quicker, and as the vibrations come in, as we become more aware of the truth, and what the truth really is, in terms of our plight, art has always been a vehicle for expressing that truth. So, does it mean those lions don't exist in that parallel reality? Does it mean that nothing in the world of the creative imagination, which I see as a vast ocean of potential, does it mean none of it exists? Or does everything exist in the world of creative imagination? How much power is there in knowing that? Because once you realize your own connection with infinite awareness, once you realize that you have the imagination to be able to bring into reality whatever it is that you need to bring truth and justice and freedom to this so-called world, this reality, then you start to realize that you could well be a 500-foot yellow lion on another level of reality, another parallel world. You might not be. I'm playing with the idea of it, but do you understand what I'm saying? It's you are more than what you think you are. I see myself as a lion on another level of reality, and in this world I am who I am. There is no separation between me and the other versions of myself, lucid, dreamlike, surreal-like in terms of art and paintings and imagination. There is no separation between those things. Like there is no separation between you and me or anybody else. We're all connected in that way. The imagination is what connects us, and William Blake said very, very accurately, I feel, that the nearest thing to what we would perceive as being God in a religious sense was the imagination. Now, I'm not religious, and I don't like the word God personally. I don't like any kind of verbal connotations to it. It doesn't mean very much to me. But what does make sense is that we have this godlike power within us, all of us, to access the imagination, to be, the imagination. That means we can create whatever we need to, or we should be able to,